Andrew Lorenzen-Strait. I want to thank especially my colleague Michelle Deitch for co-organizing this event. Thanks, Michelle. And let me then turn the podium over to Ruthie Epstein, who is really the driving force behind today's event. She is the primary author of Jails and Jumpsuits, and in her remarks she will be setting the stage for today's examination of the relationship between criminal justice reform and our country's approach to immigrant detention. Thanks very much, and again, welcome.
Thank you so much, Hutchings, for joining us, for taking a few minutes out of your busy day to welcome folks to the conference today. And I would like to thank again the University of Texas at Austin and the LBJ School of Public Affairs, including the Center for Health and Social Policy, which I hear is called CHASP. And also tremendous help has come from Carrie Battles and Kelly Pratlett, and most of all Michelle Deitch, who has just been a tremendous support both in substance and in the planning of this event. So thank you very much to the University of Texas and everyone who's supported us today. We also have, I want to mention, tremendous respect for the faculty of the law school who work on immigration detention here, specifically Denise Gillen and Barbara Hines, who Human Rights First has worked with over many, many years in different capacities, and so it's a real pleasure to be here in your hometown, at your home institution, having these discussions. And finally, I want to thank all of the speakers who were able to join us today to generously give your time and expertise to the discussion. I do want to note that we will be audio and video recording the entire day. We'll also have a reception at the end of the day, so I imagine that most folks are not going to be able to stay for the entire event, but certainly if you leave, you're most welcome to come back and join us at the end of the day for a bit more informal conversation. Human Rights First is a US-based human rights organization. We have offices in New York and DC, so it's real exciting to actually leave the East Coast and spend some time in the rest of the country, for me particularly, as a born and bred Tennessean. So New York is my adopted home. Human Rights First is committed to advocating for U.S. leadership on human rights around the world, as well as pressing the U.S. government to adhere to human rights standards here at home. We work on a range of issues. Refugee protection and immigration detention are just one of a sort of menu of issues that Human Rights First works on, pressing the U.S. government and other members of the international community to comply with human rights obligations. Here in the U.S., Human Rights First works in partnership with U.S. law firms to provide pro bono representation to indigent refugees and other immigrants who are in U.S. asylum and immigration proceedings, and we also advocate for asylum and migration policies that are consistent with U.S. human rights commitments. Our work on immigration detention has been ongoing for at least a decade, and it really flows from our work representing individuals who are held in immigration detention, mostly asylum seekers, and that work has informed the advocacy that we conduct primarily in Washington, D.C. In researching our most recent report, Jails and Jumpsuits, which the executive summary is outside on the registration table, I spent a lot of time talking for the first time in my professional history with corrections experts, and there was something perhaps illogical about turning to the correction system to get ideas about how immigration and immigration detention should work on its face, but I discovered in doing so that something that should have been quite obvious, that there is tremendous expertise on the criminal justice and corrections side, that we on the immigration detention side, whether government officials, people running facilities, or people conducting advocacy to try to improve the immigration detention system in this country, can learn from. There has been tremendous work done for several decades on the criminal justice side to try to figure out how the system should work effectively, fairly, and in compliance with human rights obligations. looking at things like what actually works, what is cost effective, what is a good use of taxpayer money. So in discovering that, we realized as an organization what has perhaps been obvious to many people for many years, that we all need to be talking to each other and learning from those areas, learning about those areas that are of common concern in both systems, while recognizing that the legal underpinnings for the criminal justice system and the immigration detention system are in fact different. So this is the purpose of today, and we're really happy to be kicking off a series of events across the country here in Texas, at the University of Texas. There are many, many reasons to be talking about detention and incarceration and immigration in the state of Texas, ranging from what actually happens in the state of Texas, and also looking at what a tremendous expertise you all have at the university and outside the university among people who have been thinking about these issues for a long time. So it's really exciting. It's exciting for me to learn from you all, and I hope that others feel the same. I think that's about it I have to say. We will be conducting events as well at the University of California at Irvine in a couple of weeks, then at Arizona State University outside of Phoenix, and finally at Loyola New Orleans College of Law. And all of these events, we hope to strengthen our collective knowledge, bring back recommendations to Washington, specifically at an event in early 2013, and strengthen the alliances and the knowledge that are informing our recommendations for immigration detention reform. So it's all very exciting to me. I hope that you all have an informative and enjoyable day and are able to learn from one another. And I think with that, I would like to turn it over to Chairman Madden, who will speak for just a few minutes to sort of set the stage on the criminal justice side. I will briefly introduce the chairman, Jerry Madden, who is representative from District 67. He lives in Richardson. He represents North Dallas and Plano. Particular interest to me because my dad grew up not in his district, but near his district. So I appreciate that, and will be informing my dad later today. Chairman Madden has served in the Texas State Legislature since 1993, and he has been the chairman of the House Corrections Committee in the Texas State Legislature. And we invited him to speak today because he really has demonstrated such tremendous leadership alongside Democratic Senator John Whitmire in advocating for criminal justice reform at the state level in Texas. He is retiring this year, which from everything I'm hearing from you all here in Austin is a tremendous loss to the state legislature, but I know that he'll continue his work in other venues. So with that, Chairman Madden.
Ruthie, thank you. You told me 5 minutes to tell the story, so we will not slowly. Start from when it started for me. I've been in the legislature, she said, since 1993, but I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a former, anybody dealing with prosecution. I've not been in the criminal justice system. In my 12 years prior to 2005, I'd never had a corrections bill. I'd never been on a corrections committee. Never been on a criminal justice committee. Had one bill that went through criminal justice in the whole 12 years that I was in the session. Never had done a bill with a senator named John Whitmire before. Certainly knew John. But it all started to me one January afternoon when the Speaker of the House called me in and says, "Jerry, you're going to be chairman of corrections." And what do? Well, you do what you always do to your Speaker of the House. You say, "Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I really appreciate the opportunity." And under my own breath, I'm thinking, "Oh God, why me? What did I do to deserve this?" And then I will tell you, I asked the question that probably, other than asking my wife to marry me, is the question that most changed my life. Because I asked him, "Mr. Speaker, what do you want me to do?" And he gave me back the 8 words that changed my life. He said, "Don't build new prisons, they cost too much." All right? How do you do with that then in the situation where you have all these projections? I'm an engineer by background. So, first of all, I went out and got me a staff, including hiring one of Michelle's students as my assistant committee clerk. And then I started looking around and saying, well, where can I get some expertise on this field that I don't have much expertise in? And I quickly found that the greatest expert in the Texas legislature was a senator named John Whitmire. John's a unique character. But I went over to John's office and we sat down for about 2 hours. And in that 2 hours, talking about the issues of corrections was like a mission that just, you couldn't believe how closely that I will call him a liberal Democrat, he won't call himself that, he'll call himself a moderate Democrat. And I'm a conservative Republican, and most everybody agrees with that. But how did we agree on that? Well, the driving ground was, don't build in prisons, they cost too much. What are the alternatives to doing that? Particularly with an ongoing upward scale that indicates, boy, you're going to be spending a lot more money. So we started looking around, we found the probation departments had some ideas. They've been out doing something. And first of all, Texas has some pretty good laws. And things we don't have as laws are probably equally as important as things we do. But we have a lot more judicial discretion. We have a pretty good structure that we have in our parole and probation departments and divisions are there. At least I think they're pretty good compared to other states that I've seen now. It doesn't mean we're perfect. Every state's different, I will tell you that. And the experience I've gained since then, every state is different. So judge your state by what your policies are, not by what we have. But in doing that, we looked at our probation departments and found out quickly that they had some pretty good ideas that they felt could reduce the flow of people to prison. Because I looked at this thing as an engineering project. And an engineering project says, here's this block, it's called prisons. And I've been told I can't put any more building blocks on that. It's built. We don't want to build anymore, they cost too much. So if I've got that and I've got a court ruling that says I can't be overcrowded, what can you do to keep your population down? Well, you got two choices, guys. This is not or you slow them down coming in. Now, we're in Texas. Which do you think is going to be more appropriate and more likely to be able to get done in Texas as a political decision? It probably is a realistic decision. You're going to be able to open the doors and let them out? Or are you going to have to figure out a way to slow them down coming in? Well, I quickly ruled out opening the doors because I knew every one of my colleagues would vote against that, including the most liberal Democrats and the most conservative Republicans. They'd all be opposed to that. So we figured out, we said, okay, how do you slow it down coming in? And the probation idea was one we took out. We worked with a lot of people across the line. John had a probation bill that he put together with the probation department. He passed it out of the Senate almost unanimously, like they do in the Senate all the time. Sent it over to us. We discovered it wouldn't pass the House in the way it was in. We worked on it extensively for about a month and a half with John and his staff, got some really good staff relationships going, got that kind of thing working together, and actually passed it on the House floor. But we came up one vote short because the governor vetoed it. And I will tell you that's the best thing that ever happened to us in the process because it made us go back and look at the whole process. It made us look at everything you could do in the process and how do you change that and how do you put together this coalition and how do you start building it by writing legislation and by doing things that will be perceived as being smart instead of just being tough on crime, being soft on crime, whatever you want to call it, but being smart. Because Texas had the reputation, obviously, of being really tough on crime. In fact, no state has a tougher reputation. But in the things that we were able to do, particularly leading into the 2007 session, when we had a projection coming in that said we were going to need 17,700 new prison beds by the year 2012. Now, anybody know what year we're in now? 2012. Can you think how much it would be costing us now if we'd have had to add 17,700 new prison beds? Well, we estimated it was about $2 billion. And we said, is there any better way to do that? And we started looking. I found, in listening to the hearings in 2005, that I had think tanks from both the left and the right who were coming in and saying things about what to do in corrections. And you know what they were saying? In almost all cases, they were saying the same thing. Oh, you had to weed through the language a little bit, and you had to throw out the real extremes. But if you took the 80% that were in the middle, they were saying the same thing. Liberals and conservatives, good, thinking, thoughtful people were saying the same thing. This is a smart thing to do. Go do them. So I put them together. One group said, go look at that probation bill and come back, tell me the governor vetoed it, go back and tell me what we can do out of it. What should we pass out of it? And they did. And Anna's one of those people that was in that group, along with Mark Levin from Protective Public Policy. And it's amazing how close they became in what they were saying and doing. And it's amazing what we could find out when we started doing the statistics and data that said what programs did we have. We already had programs. We didn't invent a new program. We just took those that were short and didn't have enough. They were huge waiting lists, so they didn't do it. Well, we said instead of having huge waiting lists and don't do them, just go do them and we'll make sure we don't have the waiting list. And by the way, how much does that cost? Can we do that? And we discovered, yeah, you could. You could do substance abuse treatment. You could do alcoholic treatment. You could do mental health treatment. You could do specialty courts. You could do a lot of those things. And yeah, it cost you some money. But did it cost you as much as building those prisons for those 17,000 people were going to cost you? And we came into the session in 2007 and we got the forecast at that time of what our thing was going to cost. And oh, by the way, if we did our thing, we weren't going to need to build prisons because we were going to stabilize the prison population. It wasn't going to go up. We had the tool we absolutely needed, particularly when they walked in and said we're going to have to spend $500 million building prisons. We had the tool we had in our hands that said, in a bipartisan way, because this is now becoming very, very bipartisan. It's becoming, if you believe in doing things on efforts of justice, you can support what we're doing because we would be, I think, fairer and more just to people saying we want certain people in the prisons, but not everybody. I mean, I got on to confess there are people we ought to lock up and throw away the key. And on the other hand, there are people we have in the prisons that we ought to ask the question, why do we have them there? And why do we have them there for the time that they're there? And we started asking those kinds of questions, and what could we do about that? And in doing that, we came to what was amazingly bipartisan, smart things that when we started putting it out to the press and letting them know what was happening, there was a vast amount of agreement on what we were doing. And so when we passed the bill, and it wasn't unanimous, we had a few votes against us, but very few, like 7 or 8 in the House. We have 150 members. It was a very small number that in the end opposed the things that we did on it. We actually had in place at that time the tools that in the last 4 years have led us so not only have we stabilized the prison system, but we actually closed one last session. We're down from last year at this time to this year, we're down 3,500 people in the prisons of Texas as of the last count that I had. That number is a significant decline in what we have, and I wouldn't be a bit surprised if we look at seriously closing prisons, plural, in this next legislative session. Now, don't feel unsafe. Texas is still tough on crime. We still have 111 prisons, and you're not going to be unsafe in Texas if we do some additional closing. But we're going to keep, so we keep public safety there, but on the other hand, doing those things that are smart and intelligent, that has led us to become the national voice in the country for what you do. And I will tell you that I think plays over into the immigration issue that you're concerned about, because I believe that, first of all, in the criminal justice system, if Texas can do it, has become the motto for other states around the country that has led them to do the same kind of criminal justice reforms that Texas led on. States like Georgia and Ohio and Kentucky and Oklahoma and several other, South Carolina and North Carolina, have done those kinds of sweeping changes that have made the difference in their state and are changing the whole course. And by the way, crime rates continue to drop, public continues to be safer, and in all those things we're spending less money. And therefore you can use that money for other things, whatever you're doing. I would tell you that I think the same kinds of discussions should start, because it started that day for me when the speaker came in and gave a very clear message, a very clear mission. I'm a graduate of the military academy, and missions mean something. The mission was simple. Don't build new prisons that cost you. The issue that you have here is probably, we've got the same thing. You could start in this area by just maybe saying we don't need to purchase more, we don't need to buy more. I mean, I was thinking about this last night from discussion they had. Maybe you slow the rate of growth. It may be the best you can do for the first 2 years. But at least figure out the ways that you can make that kind of difference. And figure out that there are people who will agree with you on both sides of the aisle. And that, I mean, as a House and Senate, not just necessarily the two political parties, but both sides of the aisle, there will be people from both parties who will agree with you that they would rather use their money on other things other than incarceration. It's a high-cost area that return is comparatively low compared to all the other things that are out there, except for those people who are truly dangerous to us, who truly endanger your life, your family's life, your property, that need to be incarcerated. But there are a lot that we need to be very careful in what we're doing. And that's what Texas has taken the lead. And I'm proud to be here. I'm proud to welcome you to the state of Texas. It's great to have your conference here. It's great to see so many people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chairman Madden. That was really informative to hear a bit of background on what's happened in the state of Texas. Now I'd like to introduce Edna to give a bit of perspective on immigration detention in Texas. Edna is General Counsel at American Gateways, where she has worked since 2002. American Gateways is a legal services provider based here in Austin that works with indigent immigrants throughout Central Texas.
Good morning, everyone. It's really nice to see all of you here. I'd like to thank Ruthie and Human Rights First for inviting me to speak this morning. In the 5 minutes that I have, I'm going to give an overview of the immigration detention system in Texas and the facilities that we at American Gateways serve. So for those of you who aren't perhaps familiar with the immigration detention system, it's a civil detention system in which Immigration Customs Enforcement, ICE, it uses as an enforcement tool for the immigration laws here. So it's not immigrants who are in the criminal justice system. It's more a civil detention system. So it's different in talking about what we see in the prison system versus the immigration system. What has happened over the past decade is that immigration has used detention more as an enforcement tool. And the idea of enforcement has consistently become more linked to the idea of detention. And so the discussions that you'll be hearing on the panel today, where there's discussions about the civil detention system overall and alternatives to detention, I think are extremely important to unlink the idea of detention and enforcement and instead talk about enforcement through other methods besides detention. There is still a push to increase civil detention throughout the United States for immigrants, and a lot of the people who are detained by ICE in the civil detention system are individuals who are seeking relief before the immigration court. So they're individuals who may be asylum seekers, they're individuals who are long-term residents or recent border crossers. And the idea that the only way to enforce the laws is to detain them is perhaps something that should be changed, or at least the system should be reviewed to ensure that there's accountability within the detention system as well. I want to talk a little bit about the national numbers. There is a fact sheet that Human Rights First supplied outside, which talks about the numbers of immigrants who are detained in the U.S. So in 2011, ICE detained over 400,000 individuals, immigrants seeking some sort of relief in the United States. There were 250 facilities, which were based in county jails or facilities run by private prison contractors and ICE-run facilities. 50% of ICE beds are in jail, and most of the rest of them are in jail-like facilities. So even though we're talking about a civil detention system, the way that it has been run traditionally has been in jail-like facilities. There has been a push to create more civil and humane detention centers, and I think there'll be a little bit more of a discussion on that when we talk about accountability as well as alternatives to detention. An important thing to note is that 40% of those actual facilities are in extremely remote areas. So they're not in Austin, they're not in San Antonio, but instead in smaller cities outside of larger cities where there are service providers, where there are courts, which can cause some additional problems, in terms are detained, and their hearings can be conducted through video teleconferencing, in which they're not even in the courtroom with their attorneys, the ICE attorneys, the government attorneys, or the judges. And that causes that raises a lot of due process issues that hopefully will be discussed in some of the panels today. Texas itself has about 25% of the total immigration detention population in the state. So there aren't a lot of service providers that do a lot of detention work. The organization that I work for, American Gateways, does provide assistance to individuals who are detained and seeking relief before the immigration court. We serve two major detention facilities, both in remote areas. The first is the South Texas Detention Complex, and the other is which is in Pearsall, Texas, and the other is the Hutto Women's Facility, which is out in Taylor, Texas. Pearsall holds about 1,700 individuals, and Hutto holds a little over 500 women. There is another new detention center that's been completed and constructed in Carnes, which is now holding about 500 individuals, which we unfortunately don't have the resources to serve. And I think that that is a common theme with immigration detention for individuals who are detained, is lack of access to resources and individuals who can provide assistance. So we receive specific funding to go down to Pearsall and provide information and education to individuals who are in the ICE civil detention system, who are seeking some sort of relief from removal from the United States. A lot of those individuals don't have attorneys, they can't afford attorneys, and they're not quite sure why they're being detained either. So providing access to them and ensuring that the detention process also includes information is extremely important. Our staff is about 13 individuals with 5 attorneys and 4 accredited representatives. So serving over 2,000 people with limited resources we have is really difficult, especially when it takes several hours to get to a detention facility, to wait, see individuals, give them information in return. And so those are some of the issues that we see repeated in the idea of immigration detention. I think that the dialogue that is happening today in terms of what immigration civil detention can learn from the process and the changes that have occurred within the criminal justice system is an important one. I think that they're very closely linked, even though one is labeled civil and the other is labeled criminal. And I think that the panels that you're going to hear today are really are important in discussing alternatives and accountability for the system overall. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Edna, for giving that brief overview. Before we start our panels today, I do want to make sure that we remember that we're talking about real people. We have assembled a tremendous amount of expertise in the room of people who are committed to running fair, humane systems and working to make those systems fair and humane. All of that work is because there are real people being impacted by these systems. So we are quite privileged to have Hope and Nazry Mustakim here with us. Drove down from Waco, Texas last night. And we've asked them to tell their own story about their interaction with the immigration detention system for a few minutes before we start our panel today.
Just a short background. I moved here in 1992. Went to high school, went to college, went to University of North Texas, and back in 2005 I was arrested and I was charged with felony, and that has triggered the deportation process for me. And before I was charged, I went through rehabilitation and treatment center in Waco, and after that treatment center, I've been working at a call center, at a homeless shelter too, and being a part of society again. And that's where I met my wife in Waco, and
one of the things I wanted to point out is that Nazry came here whenever he was 12 and acclimated to our way of life, and along with that came some struggles, and as he explained, his addiction led to, and this is where I love how we talk about criminal justice and immigration reform at the transferred to school there. He worked at the homeless shelter, which is where we met. I was an intern at Mission Waco, and a summer intern, and was just visiting for 2 months, and fell in love with that city, fell in love with just the heart for, because the city is very impoverished, and so we both had that heart to give, to serve, to love, and then we got married in 2010, and bought a house, and I got to see him walk across the stage at TSTC, and everything was going great. He'd been clean for 4 years when I met him. He was sponsoring other addicts, recovering addicts, and I just saw this character in him, this determination to just make things better. He had a great transformation story, and it inspired a lot of people, and so I did my homework on him before we got into the relationship, because there was a background there, but everyone just had such strong things to say about him, and he was just golden, just a great person. And so we're married 8 months, and I'm in school at Baylor, social work, undergrad, and we were woken up by immigration agents 7 o'clock in the morning on March 30th of 2011, just a year ago. And that's where we found out that there was a crack. They said he fell through the cracks, but when he pled guilty in 2007, the charge of the arrest was in 07 is when he finally pled. He was not informed that he was pleading to what's called an aggravated felony in immigration court. And so aggravated meant that he did not get any opportunity for relief. He would be deported, and sometimes you really don't even have rights to hearing sometimes with an aggravated felony, because it's kind of like an expedited process. And so that's where immigration system came into our lives, because before we were completely ignorant that it even existed.
So I was considered as a mandatory detention, and before that I've been working and reporting to probation for 4 or 5 years before they said, okay, this is a mandatory probation detention, and that I can be out. And so I stayed in Pearsall, Texas. I was detained in Pearsall, Texas for 10 months, and there it opened up to a different perspective and a different world that I never came across. And then when I first went in there, I was so clueless. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what's going on. The ICE officer told me I can go down to Pearsall and set my bond hearing, and just pay for bond and come out and also just come to court when the hearing date comes. That was a myth, kind of, because for me, she didn't explain that I was a mandatory detention. I was supposed to be in mandatory detention, that I can't go out, I can't post bond or anything. We tried for human parole, humanity parole, and everything that we can try, until finally, like 3 months into it, 3 or 4 months into it, an ICE officer, a field officer, explained that I'm in mandatory parole and there's nothing that we can do. Mandatory detention. And while I was in the ICE office in Waco, before they took me to Counsel, I called my probation officer. My probation officer didn't know what was going on. There was like a communication between my probation officer and the ICE officer. And she was like, she has no clue what's going on, and she actually apologized.
This has nothing to do with, I'm so sorry. I had no idea this was even happening. She actually had been recommending Nas for early release of probation. He had a 10-year probation sentence, and it was 4 years into it. And she's like, she come to our house and said, "You don't even need to be on probation. What is it?" She's like, we're wasting everybody's time. So while we were just talking about him getting off of probation, and then this happened, so she was floored. And so while he was detained there, we got to see all these things that the panels are talking about. What is civil detention? How is that any different than a prison? It's not. We experienced, and the access to legal counsel and everything. I don't know if you want to share personal stories from inside, but it's very real that just that distance to Pearsall, that hour outside of San Antonio, what a difference that makes. Access to family, work. Of course, he couldn't work for 10 months, and I was a full-time student, and we had a mortgage, brand new house, and 2 cars.
my wife with me. She's from the outside, because people inside the detention center, they have no clue on what's going on what are their rights. The right to legal counsel, like Edna was saying, like not many people have representation. They go to court representing themselves. My wife was able to ask around, and she goes to Baylor, and she spoke to somebody from Baylor Law, and they recommended some attorneys who can represent me. And we found one, and we went that way.
Our community rallied around us to help us pay for the attorney, and there's a lot of things that happened with us that we're very fortunate with, because we weren't afraid or scared to tell people our story, and which is very unique, because a lot of people in immigration detention are afraid, their families are afraid to speak about it.
And also for me, that I was represented, and yeah, and so it wasn't the most comfortable thing.
At all. For me, it was just, I found myself shocked that as an American citizen, and him as a permanent resident, I felt so betrayed that my husband would be treated that way. Because I thought, in America, it's like, if you do good, it's like we give second chances, and we believe in people, and we believe in hard work and work ethic, and he had just, from the man that I knew, I couldn't equate that they were wasting so much money to detain him. About $48,000 is what I calculated to detain him when if he was out, maybe on like even an ankle monitor, or check in once a week with an immigration officer. How much he would still be paying taxes, and he would still be helping me. I had to apply for food stamps. I had to apply for the county good health card, because I lost everything. And I think this prompted us to start. We said, when this is over, because we believed that it was going to turn out all right, and we said, when this is over, people got to know about this, because we didn't. And so one thing that was really frustrating was just how they were, how he was treated, because Naj treats people with respect, and he's never even spoken bad about someone. And so in there, to hear that the guards would talk to him so harshly and yell at him, yell at everyone, just kind of like they were in a prison. And there was nothing civil about that to me. I was like, these are people waiting to hear about their documents. Like, these are people waiting to hear about if they get deported or not, and they're being punished as if they'd already gone to criminal court. And so when I would visit through the glass, the families that were there, it was devastating to see the children crying, reaching out for their dad. You heard Papa a lot. And they would cry and scream, and there was newborn babies and pregnant women, and I knew their pain, and I knew how real that was, what they were feeling. And it wasn't just rhetoric to me, like it was real life. And yeah.
It poses a lot of hardship on the family. I see a lot of time where dads of a family with 5 children being detained, and this one man from Britain, and finally got deported, but how his wife had to find a boyfriend to support the family, and that in the end he's being deported while they have 5 children in the family. There's so many heartbreaking stories in the detention center, but with the way they're treating the detainees in there, especially like the medical, they don't have very much expertise. They have practitioners, they don't have doctors there. I see people going in with alopecia just because of stress related, and trying to report sick, and of course they fill out a form, and 2 days later they'll call you, and we will go see the doctor and the practitioner. First you see the nurse. The nurse say, oh, there's nothing, just ibuprofen. They love to give ibuprofen with 10 packs of ibuprofen. And he came back and said, like, they said there's nothing they can do, just like to drink more water and relax. You can't really relax in a situation like that. And for me, like, one time I fell playing basketball. The rec area is a basketball court. And I fell down and fell on my back. At midnight, I went to the guard and told them, say, I need to see the medical officer. And she said, okay, I'll call them, and just wait at your bunk, and I'll come back. And then she came back and said, like, rating from 1 to 10, how painful is it? I said, I don't know, about 8, you know, and then that's all. I never heard back. And then I did some volunteer work in there, and then like next day they came and said, hey, were you trying to call the medical to see the medical officer? I said yes. I said, well, you need to put in a sick request, you know, and then we'll be able to see you. And there's no immediate attention, and it's like they don't take us seriously either. It's like we are a lower grade of people.
And so that's just basically it, just highlighting the lack of access to life and family and counsel, and just a lack of oversight. Rules were always different. There was not really a standard among the guards and the rules and medical care and everything. So thanks for talking about this. It's good to know people are on our side. And when we were going through the situation, we started to meet some of you and find out about some of you. And so that was really encouraging. And thanks for all the hard work you do. And I hope that we've all learned a lot today. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Hope and Naz, so much for sharing your story. We are now going to get going with the alternatives to detention panel, and Scott Henson will be moderating. He is author of the Texas Criminal Justice Blog, Fritz for Breakfast. Tremendous resource about everything you'd ever want to know about what's going on in Texas. And I'll let Scott introduce the other panelists.
Putting a couple pieces of paper together to say 2 minutes, 1 minute, so we can know when, as we're counting down. All right, my name is Scott Henson. I'm happy to be here today. Thank y'all for coming. My background on immigration detention is relatively limited and mostly function of monitoring what goes on in Texas County jails, about which I know a lot more and have covered on my blog, Rich for Breakfast, quite a bit. But I have, as in preparing to moderate this session, I have boned up quite a bit, and actually it's been a significant eye-opener. I should say before I say what I'm about to say next that my opinions here don't represent human rights first, or certainly anybody but myself. But I have got to say, having now sort of looked more closely at some of the nuts and bolts of the immigration detention process and how this all works, it is a fiscal conservative nightmare, an absolute nightmare. I will tell you that the most right-wing county commissioner's court in Texas wouldn't tolerate for a second the kind of dysfunction and inefficiency and just waste of millions and millions of dollars that is apparently just accepted in the immigration system as just how everybody does things. And some of it was incredibly eye-opening. Again, my focus on some of these topics stems from looking at Texas County jails, and really grew out of a period just after the turn of the century where our county jails were basically bursting at the seams, especially at in the bigger cities, in the urban areas. And the voters finally had said enough is enough, and in several of the jurisdictions had refused to authorize new bonds to expand their jails. And so all of a sudden, these county commissioners' courts, mostly run by Republicans, were struggling with